Hello there, welcome back to another week of shows. You may have noticed something very different about me. I'm smiling. I'm laughing. And I'm talking about the Wicker Man remake. Ooh. Yes, I felt this look was appropriate for this film, this crazy film. Obviously, I dedicate this film to Dion Wynn, who loves this film playing even more than me. This crazy Nicolas Cage movie from the sort of mid to late 2000s. This was hated by everybody. This was viewed as an obscenity. This was like, look at this, Nicolas Cage in a bear suit. Mate, what the hell? The whole film's like that. It's like, what the hell is this? What is going on here? What's happening with this crazy film? Well, what happened was they decided to remake a film that shouldn't have worked but did. Like, The Wicker Man's one of those, the original Wicker Man, made by Robin Hardy, based on script by Anthony Sheffer, Simon Edward Woodward and Christopher Lee, was one of those crazy films that on release it was pretty much dumped because no one could make a head nor tails of it. It was like one of those ones that was like, what the hell was this about? Because it's all about this repressed detective who's looking after, who's falling on mystery in this island and trying to find a missing child. And as the film goes on, he starts to feel no one's telling him the truth, no one's telling him what's going on. It's set in a Scottish island, so there's this paganism going on, and it's this kind of feeling of strangeness and oddity. And of course, the end goes into the thing when he realises he's a sacrifice to the Wicker Man. I mean, it's an old film, so everyone knows the twist. It works because it's weird. I mean, it's really weird. I mean, originally I was thinking of doing a double bill between this and the original, but then I thought the remake needs something of its own to be discussed. It needs its own little moment in the sun, you know, with a bear suit on. That's what it needs. So that's what I'm going to give it. Now, The Wicker Man was developed, the remake was developed for a long time, and no one had a clue how to do it because the original was so weird. The original really shouldn't have worked. It only really worked because the paganism element was so bizarre. And all the choices they made was so bizarre, but because they had a real advantage of Edward Woodward in the lead, who really delivered on that weird, repressed character, that made it work, and the atmosphere made it work, and the strangers made it work, and who the hell knows what happens in Scotland? You know, speaking of a Scottish person, who the hell knows? So, it worked for what it was. It was a weird film, but it worked. There was something elemental in it, but it shouldn't have worked. Logically, it should have been a failure, but the right people came together and made this film that was a gem, and everyone loves it, and people rewatch it all the time, and it's always praised. So that's the kind of film that logically you should not remake. You should never touch that. You should never go anywhere near that. That's just insane, going anywhere near that kind of film. But Neil LaBute, enfant terrible of the theatre, who was making films at the time, decided to remake it anyway with Nicolas Cage. I mean, I think it was Nicolas Cage was producing it and was spearheading it because he loved the original film, and he thought there was a chance to take this tale that maybe not everyone's seen and then bring it to the mainstream audience and actually give them something really creepy, which was a nice idea actually, to try and give people something that was strange and odd and different. He chose the wrong director. He really chose the wrong director and writer. Because, I mean, one of the big issues with this film is it's made by a guy who doesn't understand horror movies. Really doesn't understand them. He doesn't get them at all. I mean, it reminds me a lot of John Boorman when John Boorman was making The Exorcist 2, where it was a director who wasn't really, it was maybe doing a horror sequel in that case, but he doesn't like horror, and he doesn't understand the concepts of horror, of what people like in horror. Some of the directors kind of looks down horror a little bit. Now, you feel Neil LaBute's the same, and Neil LaBute was trying to make a horror movie and do all these tricks and shock tactics, and he'd hire a lot of people, talented people, like Angelo Badalamenti as a composer. Lots of good people in the background making, the set designs, the photography, everything. They hired lots of good people here. The cast was great. Everybody was great. But the one person that needed to understand horror and the build-up of unease was the one person who didn't understand it. Basically, it was somebody who wanted to create an atmosphere that was more of a fairy tale atmosphere. Which would have been good if he still had a fundamental understanding of where the horror had to be within that. I mean, this a guy understood verbal horror in his works. It was very much about people saying things you don't expect, and so I mean he did his own version of horror, but he didn't understand traditional horror. Same with Boorman made Deliverance and Hell in the Pacific and things, where he made things with horror tinges, but he never could get into the actual genre, and he didn't really respect the genre, and that's the same case here. There was just a lack of respect for the genre that really bit this film in the arse, like big time, because they were doing things that any director would tell you don't do. Like, it goes straight into the melodramatic exit. I mean, if you're going to go melodramatic like Brian De Palma does, you build it up slowly. You get people acclimatized to the film, and then you introduce it, and then you have a sense of humour about it at the same time, and people can slowly get into the film. This one, within about 2 minutes, is going completely into melodrama and weird shots, and shots that strangely don't work, because they're over the top, but they're not over the top in an interesting way. There's a scene with a mother and a child in a little car that's been smashed by a big truck, and he's trying to get this girl out, and she dies, and it's lots of weird shots trying to get into the girl, and it's very much in his head, and it's weird, but it doesn't work. It feels like it feels like something should have been a flashback later on, but better shot. Instead, you get a lot of imagery like what you see behind me, which is very kind of orangey. There's a lot of stuff about bees. Exodus 2, it was locusts. This one is bees. But the thing is, bees in an individual scene are scary. En masse, they're not that scary, really. They just don't. Some reason they don't do it for you. It has to be shot a certain way to make it scary. You remember the Michael Caine film, The Swarm? It was a big budget killer bee movie. Nobody cared. It's never worked. There's something about bees that aren't scary en masse. They're interesting to see, but they're not scary. Same with locusts, they're not scary. And you build up this atmosphere of these bees and this atmosphere of this kind of matriarchy in this island. It's in Washington State that's been cut off from the rest of the world, and they have paganistic beliefs. But they don't build up the paganism as much as this kind of idealistic world or beautiful world. They don't bring up they suggest a horror that summons up the girl, there's something scary going on. But then they always have all these sequences of all this beauty, and they never build up the dread. It just seems like Nicolas Cage is overacting and overreacting to everything, because he's acting against something that's not quite there. And this is a case of where the film would have been a lot better if they'd really played up the idea of an unreliable narrator. Like if they'd actually, one, put narration in. I think this is a film that needed voiceover to get an idea what Nicolas Cage's character actually thought. And two, make it really unreliable, so what you're seeing maybe not be what you're seeing, and take out some of the weird jump scares. Maybe you could have brought something into it that would have worked. But instead, you've got all these sequences of bees. And very few people are allergic to bees. Most people get a bee sting, it's sore for a couple of days, and then they get over it. I mean, really, no, most people don't have that. And Nicolas Cage character allergic to bees, so he's a thing about bees. So he's on an island full of bees, and he's allergic to them. But that's not a scary thing for most people. And he's trying to find this child who they then say, "Oh, this is your child," because it's a child of a woman he had an affair with years ago, about the right time for when, for the child, for the age of the child, it was the right amount of time, really. And there's all sorts of things going on that point to that the child has been kidnapped, and the mother's saying, they're lying to you, And if you know the film, around the films, you know she's lying to him as well, and it's all set up, and he's been trapped. But they don't set up. One, it's not as playful as the original. It feels a bit more pompous, and two, it's just there's no momentum to the story. There's a weird momentum to the original, but this one there's no momentum. It's this dreamlike atmosphere, but it's very meandering, and there's things happen, but nothing really dramatic happens. Now, I enjoyed that aspect of it. It was like this weird, this guy walking around. Nicolas Cage has been he's playing a character who's into like self-help books, and he's a cop, but he's not very macho, and there is a kind of feminine quality to him as well, in the midst of all these women. And it's a film about feminized men in a matriarchy. That's kind of what it is. That's kind of horror story it is, but it doesn't actually have the guts to really be misogynistic in a way. I mean, it's like in Cage said, "Oh, you bitchy," stuff like that, but it doesn't really go into the weirdness of the whole thing, or the weirdness of some of the male view of what would be like matriarchy. It doesn't go into that. It just goes for this atmosphere, but it doesn't have the incidents that actually would make it interesting. There's nothing. Cage's characters remains vague throughout. All the other characters he runs into are kind of one-note characters who are there to deliver some doubt in his head and a bit of suspense, but no one's really developed. There's no point of view. There's just scenes of people talking, but there's no point of view being progressed. There's no sense of an atmosphere of evil, an atmosphere of dementia, of these pagan beliefs. The actual paganism and what they believe in this matriarchy doesn't seem to connect. There's no real connection. And that's what a real horror director would have brought to it. Something there, something rotten within that would have delivered. What this really needed was take the script, bring in some new director, some young director who could say, look, we need to really build this up a bit more, and in some ways take it further away from the original as well, and actually do something new, because this film was stuck between being faithful to the original and being too faithful in some ways, because you know what everything's going to happen, so there's no suspense, and but not doing anything interesting with it. It does moderate interesting things, but it doesn't really push it far enough, so it just feels like it's an in-between film that becomes unintentionally funny throughout it, because everybody's going at what they're doing at 110%. I mean, as you can see behind me, you've got all these people with masks on. Really interesting idea, but the masks don't have a weird quality that someone Eyes Wide Shut would have. Eyes Wide Shut was much better. This kind of stuff with watching your head, the ambiguity. And this one is not really there. It's just lots of scenes of people with masks on. There's a point where Cage goes in a bear suit, which is weird, and then it's punching women, which is really weird. But it doesn't really add up to anything. It is a kind of meandering quality, and there's a kind of lack of definition in the story, but all the actors are going for it. They're really going for it. Cage is really trying his best. It's really entertaining because he's subdued in some ways, but then he goes over the top in other ways, and it's weird. And Ellen Burstyn as the Christopher Lee part, which is the leader of the group, in this one, case, the matriarch, is potentially interesting, but she just overplays the high and mighty element, and there's not really the threat of something really bad coming. It just is. It's like actors really going for it, but they don't have the material to really go for it. They don't have the direction to do get the nuances right. It just feels really weird. There's lots of funny stuff that the director always found funny, like Cage always going around down on a bike and being useless with the bike, which is funny, but Cage can do a lot with that, but it doesn't really add anything. And that's the thing about this film, it doesn't really add anything to anything, like, ever. It just feels like it's a vaguely thought out idea how to approach a Wicker Man, but they started filming it when it wasn't ready. Like, it really wasn't ready. And then went onto the location, they kept on adding stuff and adding atmosphere and like pushing it up higher and higher, the levels of the acting higher and higher and higher to bring life to it, but actually the problem was there wasn't life in the script in the first place. There was lots of stuff there. And everything was set up almost to be a bit over the top rather than threatening, rather than scary. Like, the whole idea was he's trying to find a child in an island of these weird people. And that should be enough. But in this film, it doesn't really connect. No matter what they do, it doesn't connect at all. Just the way it's been shot and the way it's been put together. You're watching this floating mess in front of you, and it's just weird. But for me, very enjoyable because it is a strange film. It's a weird one. It's a really weird one. And there are a lot of pleasures in this film, though. I mean, Cage in a manic pop is always good fun, and here you've got some great weird bits where he's in the fight scene with little Subuski, and there's a bit where he is dressed as a bear and he's around punching people. And there's a bit where they put the bees in this helmet here in the background. Oh, the bees, not the bees. And there's bits where they end up putting the Wicker Man, which isn't scary, it's funny, which is the problem, is that Cage could have been a better actor for this with a different director, but in this one, he's indulged in some of his weird development, but he's not been brought in to, like, serve the story. Like, Cage always tends to be a fun actor to watch, but here, he's not really given direction. It doesn't feel like he's given things specific that's interesting. It just feels like he's be weird or be subdued, and there's not much more he's really been given. But he's entertaining to watch through the film, and the atmosphere's entertaining. The whole thing's really entertaining, even though it's very meandering and weird and odd, and nothing builds to horror. It just builds to this sense of weirdness and disconnection and like what the hell's going on in this film. That's what the film is. The film is just strange. You know, just very, very, very weird. But I think it's wonderful in a weird way, but it is... You can't call it a success. I mean, there are major issues with this film. There's major issues. You can't say it's a successful film, but it is a very entertaining film. It's one of those films that fail but succeed in a different way. And it's way more entertaining than Possession, which was Neil LaBute's film before this, which was an adaptation of a E.S. Byatt novel. The novel was great and the film really wasn't. The film was a real disappointment. At least this was entertaining. That film really wasn't. It was really bad. Like I think Neil LaBute's a kind of mediocre director, to be honest. I don't think his films to me always seem half-baked. Like he's kind of half figured them out, then shot them, and he hasn't quite finished the job before you get into shooting. And that's the big downfall in this film. It just feels like it hasn't been really worked on. And no one's actually said, look, you have to really deliver on these elements. Because his way of delivering those elements is the most tacky thing possible, and it's just a mess. It's a total mess, but it's a wonderful mess. It's a film you couldn't really invent. It's one of those things, it's enjoyable to watch, to see a film go completely wrong, but be really entertaining at the same time. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed my visual look for this video. And we're back soon with something a bit more conventional. But this is my What the Hell Is This? The Wicker Man. Right, bye for now.